Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is the number and quantity video, as well as probability and statistics. So we're going to take a look at some big ideas, some big themes that often happen in the terms of number and quantity, as well as probability and statistics. So let's first start with the number and quantity idea. Well, obviously, because the word numbers in there, you're going to be doing some work with different types of numbers. For example, there's fractions and decimals. So when you're asked to compare fractions or compare decimals, obviously it's very important that we understand where they would fall on a number line or which one's bigger than which one, and how they would all kind of be in order from least to greatest, or let's say greatest to least. So sometimes one of the struggles that people will have is, what if all of those are fractions and they all have different denominators? Well, one of the fast ways to figure out how to put them in order from greatest to least would be to convert them to their decimal equivalent. And if you can do that, then you can identify which one is the smallest, like in this case it's 0.2 or the 2/10. If you can put them in order as decimals, then certainly you can then figure out which fractions would go in order based on their whole equivalent idea: decimals, fractions, equivalency. Okay, so think about that as a strategy to help you compare fractions if you're asked to put them in order. Some of the other types of numbers that you might be asked to work with are complex numbers or radicals. And we've been working with these in our Algebra 2 class here in terms of complex numbers. They have imaginary number I in them, and we performed operations with them like addition, subtraction, multiplication, even division. So what does it look like when I do that? How do I add or subtract like terms? Like this one. 2 is the regular real number part, minus 4 would make -2, and then I, the imaginary part, also gets subtracted. 2 minus 2i. Pretty simple, as long as you understand that the I is just treated like any other sort of variable. That is, unless you have to multiply out, in this case, when you would multiply each piece by each piece here, and then we must remember that I squared equals -1, so in our simplification, we might need to deal with that along the way. And then we also worked with radicals quite a bit in geometry in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. So dealing with how to operate on numbers that have square roots. So performing operations like adding them, subtracting them, multiplying them, dividing them. Contrary to popular belief, when you add the square root of 20 plus the square root of 45, it does not equal the square root of 65. You first need to simplify each of these, making like radicals, and then you might be able to add them together. So after we work with different types of numbers, we just need to remember that percents represent decimals or fractions. In fact, the word percent means hundredths or number out of 100. So when you're using a percent or talking about percent, you're really talking about how much out of 100. So you divide by 100 to get its decimal form. Oftentimes these questions are asked like 15 is what percent of 20? And if you translate this into algebra here, 15 is the equal sign. What percent is the x that I'm looking for? Of means multiply, 20. So if I translate this, I can go ahead and then divide by the 20. When you're trying to find a percent, you're going to do that through division. 15 divided by 20 is 0.75, which we know to be 75%, 75 out of 100. So percents happen quite often as well on these types of assessments. Sometimes it's the small things that we forget, like the distance equals rate times time formula. And you can use that to calculate average speed, velocities, and such. And it's distance equals rate times time. It's a pretty common one. It's a different distance formula than probably what you're used to algebraically, but it's one that is often going to be looked at in terms of different types of assessments. So distance, of course, is the d in this formula. Rate is the speed, maybe in kilometers per hour or miles per hour. And then time, of course, is given to you as well, or you might need to solve for it. So this formula is often one that's used. And one of the last things with numbers and operations are matrices. Now, you may or may not have any experience with matrices, but basically it's just a table to organize data or to organize numbers. So they normally look like a little mini spreadsheet. And you can add or subtract these little mini spreadsheets together to figure out what the answer might be. This is what it might look like. We have a little spreadsheet or a little table here with 2, 3, 5, 6, and I need to add it to the other little spreadsheet of 1, negative 10, 8, negative 2. Well, in order to add them, you just add the numbers that are in the same spot. Like 2 is in the same spot as the 1, so if I add them together, I would get 3 in that spot of my new table that I'm going to make. Like the same way I'd add 3 plus negative 10, and then I'd add the 5 plus the 8, and in the end I get a new little table with those values added together. So my final answer would be something like 3, negative 7, 13, 4. They look kind of different in terms of the symbolic notation or the thing that you're going to look for here, but in the end, what you do with them is not that, big of a stretch in terms of adding numbers together. You could even multiply an entire matrix by a number, and that wouldn't be such a big deal or not so complex, okay? So when we take a look at the other subgroup that we want to do today, and that's probability and statistics, there are some main things we need to know here as well. First of all, mean, median, and mode. They're one of these things that just keeps popping up, popping up, popping up, and it's something that you learn earlier in your math career, and then sometimes we continue to talk about it, and sometimes they kind of get all jumbled up in your head. But please remember that the mean is really just the average of numbers, and that means you add them all up and divide by however many there are. It's easy to find a test average. I add all of your test grades together and divide by however many test grades we have. The median is a little different. You place the numbers in numerical order and then find the middle number. So it has nothing to do with adding anybody together and dividing. You're just going to place the numbers in order and determine which one is in the actual middle. And then the mode is the number that occurs the most often in the data. So the one that just keeps occurring over and over, that would be considered the mode. Another big thing to know for probability and statistics is often a question about lunch menus or different combinations of outfits. So sometimes this is just referred to as the counting principle. So, oh, and I can see I didn't spell that right. Principle. There we go. When there are m ways to do one thing and n ways to do another, then there are m ways of doing both. Basically, you multiply them. So what this might look like in a quick example here to not go too complex, let's say there are 3 shirts and 4 pairs of pants in your wardrobe. How many different outfits can you make? Well, if there are 3 shirts and 4 pairs of pants, we can just multiply those two numbers to make 12 different outfits. Oftentimes you might see this as a lunch menu provides 3 different choices of sandwiches, 2 different types of juices, 5 different soups. How many different lunch combinations can you make? Just multiplying those numbers would tell you that answer. And then last part of probability to understand is just the basic idea of simple probability. And it refers to the chance that a specific outcome will occur. So basically, it's just a simple ratio that you can divide out to make a percent or a decimal equivalent to that. And basically, the setup is that the number of ways that a specific outcome can occur over the total number of possible outcomes. So what are the chances that a fire drill would happen during mod 17? Well, if it's mod 17, that's 1 mod out of how many total mods are in our daily schedule? 22. So the chance is 1 out of 22. That's the probability. And I could divide that to turn that into a percent if I wanted to, therefore talking about the percent chance that something were to happen. So probability oftentimes is just written as this fraction, and that's good to go. You don't have to necessarily turn it into that decimal equivalent. Fractions often represent those percents or the probabilities on these types of assessments. Okay, so that's really the highlight of all things numbers and quantity, as well as some simple probability. Really, to know that you have the hang of this, take a look at some problems, okay? That's really where the magic happens in terms of your understanding these different types of contextual situations that could ask you to do these things. Okay, I want to thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Kincaid out.